situation is gradually becoming a national security concern, and the earlier action is taken, the better it will be to safeguard the peace and stability of our country, it concludes. So, well, the Daily Graphic chose to put a lot of emphasis today on youth unemployment, and ended up by observing that this is a potential national security issue, and that all must be done to ensure that we stem this particular tide of unemployment, especially when you will all agree with me that we even have a group that calls itself unemployed graduates. They now have an association, and they are fighting tooth and nail to ensure that they get jobs. Some are also of the view that, well, you don't wait for government to get you a job. You should also go out there and seek for a job. In other words, be an entrepreneur. Well, whatever it is, we are here to discuss this matter. And we have been joined by Dr. Obodele Kambon, Research Fellow, Institute of African Studies, University of Ghana. And I think, well, I have been corrected by my producer, Obadele. I want to believe so. And so I am saved and protected so that Doc will not chide me. Doc, you're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Well, we thank you very much, Doc, for I know how busy you are. I have been informed. You've been able to spare time to be with us. We appreciate it very, 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 very much. Mm-hmm. Now, youth unemployment. I want to start with you, Mr. Arthur. This issue of youth unemployment, it looks as if we are not finding any way out. Of course, attempts are being made, but the problem keeps on, exacerbating. What should we do?
Thank you, Alaji. Youth unemployment is a very serious issue because the youth today are to be our future leaders. And if we don't engage them in any gainful activity, how then do we ensure the sustainability of the development of the nation? So it's something that we all should put our heads together to look at how to come up with solutions. Now, before we can talk about how to arrest the situation, let's look at what is causing the youth unemployment.
Oh, okay.
You agree with me that we are not expanding our industries. We are not expanding our productive sectors as it should be. And when we look at our educational system, the educational system too is not training people to be on their own. The students are taught how to engage themselves in white collar jobs. And therefore, when they complete school, you'll see that there was no avenue for them. And therefore, I'm of the opinion that, yes, entrepreneurship, people are being trained to be entrepreneurs. But what sort of the sort of training that is being given to them and their contribution, would it be enough to really catapult the nation into a productive sector? Because it's like what is happening is like a drop in the ocean. Few people are doing this, and few people are doing batik, few people are doing, and you think that is entrepreneurship. I'm not sure that is so. So we need to sit down and take a collective effort by trying to look forward, look ahead. Because it looks to me like we are just steeped in the past. We are not looking forward. We are not forward thinking. In order to be innovative enough to see what are the requirements of our society today. Do we need the services? What services do we require? Technology. How are we training people to be technological conscious? You come to our universities and it's the same old training people to be appendages of the colonial masters. What is still being done? And I think until the time that we find the needs of the nation and try to train people accordingly, I think we'll be talking about this on mass unemployment of the youth.
Okay. Well, who is an unemployed person? According to the United Nations, it is someone who is looking for a job, and actively seeking to work. So you are making all the attempts to get a job because you want to work, but you can't find one. That is what they are saying. That is for you to qualify to be counted statistically as unemployed. That is the criteria that you use by definition. And this normally they put an age, what do you call it, limit, 14 to 28. Some countries go beyond the United Nations, definition. In that situation, let's look at it contextually. In other words, the Ghanaian situation. What do you have to say?
Well, thank you very much.
And then consider the educational system. And the age before you even get to the university, get out of the university.
Thank you. And once again, good evening to your listeners and to my fellow panelists. Now, I think that if you ask me, the most prevalent form of unemployment in our country today, among the youth especially, is what is referred to as structural unemployment. You see, there are times when there are changes in demand over time, not just of sectors or the people in the country, but worldwide. And the demands for those industries also come to play in how we should inform, generate, and train our human resource to provide those services. Now, we have not, as a matter of urgency, made the effort to consciously see the need to train our people in this regard, because now we have moved from what we call a post-manufacturing world to the service economy now. The world is in what we call a service economy, and we have not trained people enough to be in the service economy. Now, I think that most of the time, as my good panelist was saying, you see, we are still stuck in the past of this grammar education where you just go to school, so it's just a process that you have to go through, and then something that actually fits you into the world as of now. Because we have a globalized world, and with time keeps on changing rapidly, and we need to make sure that we factor in these changes into training our professionals. Now, if you look at the situation where you have all these people coming out of all these universities, if I may, all these polytechnics and universities, at least 50,000 every academic year. And if you have a situation where the economy of the country is not structured enough to absorb all these people. We are looking at this World Bank thing that is saying 300,000. 300,000. And how many is the private sector going to take? How many will the public sector take? But you see, the fact is that we have still not moved from the post-manufacturing stage into the service industry. And in the service industry, you need just more than grammar education. You also need entrepreneurial ability. I think that, you see, and the other side of it is that all that we do is practically playing politics with it, because this government comes and says, oh, I have this policy for the youth. We need to, as a matter of urgency, bipartisanly address the issue, because looking at youth unemployment for any nation is serious. If you do not do that, then we have a situation where you have idle hands for people to easily recruit into some of these radical elements of society. I think
Right. Of course, Dr. Obodile, we brought you here for a different matter, but I cannot allow this to go without having your comment as a research fellow, and let me, correct me if I'm wrong, a globalist.
I would say a global African.
A global African, yes. You might have traveled widely. How do you look at this?
Okay, thank you for the opportunity to weigh in, and also thanks to my co-panelists. I'll say this. I was born and raised in the United States, and I came to Ghana, University of Ghana, to do my PhD. And I was able to pay for my PhD by being unemployed. What do I mean? I mean that I was an entrepreneur. So I have a website. A lot of things that sometimes we don't think are valuable, other people in the world found them to be quite valuable. So I was able to pay my way through school by teaching Twi, Yoruba, and Wolof, the major language of Senegal, online. So the site has had over 1.4 million users. And a lot of the students were people who their children are Ghanaian, both Ghanaian parents or both Nigerian parents, but they were born in the UK, they were born in the US, and because they didn't grow up learning the language, it's something that's very important to them and valuable to them. So here we would just say, oh, it's an African language, but there it's something that's highly, valued. So each student pays $195 because here at the University of Ghana, now as an employee here, I know that they pay us in Ghana cedis,
right.
But as a student, you have to pay in dollars.
Right.
So at first they thought I was a Ghanaian. They said 500 Ghana cedis. Then they saw my passport. They said $4,000.
Right.
So then I came to where am I going to get this from? Well, luckily, or not luckily, I was able to have lots of different skills, including language skills, including building websites, including, doing all these types of things. So because of the skills that I had, I was able to pay my way through school. Now my daughter is 8 years old. She is the webmaster of her own website, amakambon.com, where she teaches food preparation. We just did a video up at Ebri where she taught over 20 youth her age and younger how to prepare food, because she said she wants to be a chef. So it's a skill that she's learning. We have someone who works at African Studies, Jemima. She works in the front, Auntie Jemima. And she decided to just teach my daughter. We homeschool her, so she gets all types of experiences and skills. She decided to just teach her how to do beading, because I had her do the beading on this. So she said, let me teach your daughter how to do the beading. So she just gave her string and beads. So things that we often wouldn't even think are valuable, the more skills we have, I'll put it how my father puts it,
right.
It's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it.
Right.
So the more skills, the better.
Dr. Obadile, I'll come back to you for this experience. We have Professor Abochi from the Sociology Department. We want him to look at the impact, because he's quite busy. He'll address that and then I'll come back to you. So just hold your thought. Good evening, Professor Abochi.
Hello.
Yeah, good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Right, thank you very much, Professor Abochi, for accepting to talk to us on Radio Univers. We are looking at youth unemployment, and so as a sociologist, would want you to weigh into this particular debate and possibly stretch it to the effects or impact of this to the society, in other words, Ghana.
The immediate reaction to the issue of unemployment is that it invariably leads to economic criminality. In other words, crimes that are often committed for money. And it takes place not only in the urban communities, but wherever people live and they don't have access to jobs, they will be prone to commit a variety of crimes, because without crimes, they cannot survive. So we can think about crimes like armed robbery and stealing, smuggling, even drugs, including even the temptation by some people to get into types of crimes which might be regarded as white-collar crimes. So basically, it is a critical issue for governments to have as a priority job creation. And job creation does not refer to the availability of jobs which do not pay very well or are not long enduring, but jobs which are respectable and pay very meaningful salaries. Part of the problem for governments who are unable to create jobs is that they have a lot of criminal-minded people in the street who are causing a number of problems for well-meaning and law-abiding people. Most of the crimes that we often hear about committed, which are of violent nature, are products or functions of unemployment. I can make reference to the crimes committed in various countries. For example, what we have heard about in France, we heard about in Britain, and we hear about in America. All of these crimes have been committed because people have been radicalized as a result of having no jobs to do. If you read the literature on Boko Haram, you find that they are targeting unemployed youth. Because they don't have anything to do, they are very easily prone to being recruited into the movement to cause terror. So basically, unemployment is an issue that should be targeted critically by governments which are oriented towards bringing peace and order in their societies. Do you have a follow-up question?
Yes. If this is the problems that we are likely or we will encounter, in fact, we are even encountering these problems as we speak. As a sociologist, can you help us appreciate why the nation finds itself in this particular, situation?
What can be thought about immediately is the fact that the absence of education or the inaccessibility of education to a large majority of people, because those who get jobs are usually those with skills that they can sell. So they're highly educated. The government's responsibility in social crime prevention is to create jobs. And as I emphasize, these jobs must be meaningful, well-paid, and long-enduring jobs, which has, like good incomes, and the good incomes makes it possible for people to live a meaningful life. So basically, the responsibility lies at the door of the government to make it possible not only for itself as a government to create jobs, but to even make it possible for private investors to help in the creation of jobs.
Okay. Can we unpack this word called education? Because there is a school of thought that thinks that our educational system does not help in building skills. So there is a mislink somehow in terms of our model or type of education and then the development or acquisition of skills. If you agree to this school of thought or you vary from this particular, angle of thinking, what type of education do you think that is most appropriate to be able to fill this gap?
Well, every society needs all kinds of people.
Okay.
We do not need only artisans. We do not need only mechanics, carpenters, and plumbers.
Okay.
We need all kinds of people which make life in society very meaningful. So education should be quite well spread.
Okay.
You find that if you came to the university, you have a degree in probably sociology, or you have a degree in economics. The training that you're given is not to function only as a sociologist or an economist. The training makes it possible for you to be able to function in any kind of an assignment because you have a good training and you're able to use your accumulated knowledge to apply yourself meaningfully and successfully to doing any kind of an assignment. But that being as it is, we need as a nation to concentrate on the specific areas where we find that the need is mostly felt. In other words, we should be focusing in the middle level area, particularly technical jobs, training people of the middle level in a variety of skills, which are usually provided by the polytechnics. These skills are usually sellable on the market as compared to other non-technical skills.
Okay.
So I would suggest that the focus should be on the creation of technical skills, which are directed towards the specific objectives of the nation as it moves forward.
Okay.
In terms of technology, in terms of other skills which may be required to service the various sectors of the economy.
Okay. Right. Thank you very much, Professor Abochi, Senior Lecturer, Sociology Department, University of Ghana. We appreciate it very, very, very much, sir.
You're very welcome.
Good. Right. I go back to Dr. Obadele, if you can continue with your line of presentation.
Yes, so I was saying that for my daughter, we homeschool her. Actually, I have 3 children. So my daughter is 8, my son is 3, and I have another daughter who is 1. And part of the homeschool curriculum is designed to teach them various skills. So my daughter is the webmaster of her own website. So anytime she does an assignment, either in Chi or in Yoruba or in English or whatever, she is able to post it. So these are web development skills that she's learning. And basically the idea is that oftentimes we look at the government as some type of divine celestial provider. And I think part of the issue is that we need somewhat of a paradigm shift. Instead of being dependent on someone to give us a job, the link in the entrepreneurship is that you yourself are able to use whatever skills you have. The thing that you oftentimes may think isn't valuable, someone in the world thinks is extremely valuable. And the internet is one such tool that can connect you with those people. So you have people who are online and they do videos about how to do raw food. You have people who tell you how to, take care of dogs. Whatever the thing you know how to do is valuable to someone. Right now I'm building a house at Mampong, and there are people who still know how to use mud brick for the building. So a lot of people would say, oh, that's something, whatever. But if you go to places like Arizona, New Mexico, this is a multi-million-dollar industry. They call it Adobe brick buildings. So you have people who come all the way from the U.S., from the UK. There's a documentary online called First Earth. People come from throughout the world to go to villages to learn how to do this. Then they take it back and they call it sustainable building, sustainable architecture. So all of these things that are right around us are literally gold mines. The knowledge that we have here in Africa are gold mines to other people. So, I think part of it, and, we can go into the government's responsibility if we're paying tax, we're paying VAT, and we can come back to that. But I wanted to start off just with some level of, let's shift our paradigm and see what each one of us has that we can use in order to create our own jobs, and then in turn to create jobs for others.
Great. I'm tempted to leave this particular discussion, but you've introduced a subject that I cannot let it pass, and maybe my panelists should bear with me. Listening to you, it looks as if and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Bodile, do you think that colonialism, quote unquote, has somehow destroyed us? Because if you talk about mad building in this country, nobody will value it. But you see, you've given it a name, sustainable building, which indeed is appropriate. If you go up north for their climate, we've moved even brick houses. I mean, a government tried as much as possible to make us accept brick, use it. But very few. We want concrete, cement. They started it at Dansuma. I think the former President Kufuor actually had a brick factory. You know, there were also problems with it. Do you think colonialism, because we inherited certain things and decided not to rethink again, we stopped thinking. What would be your comment to my observation? Am I wrong?
I would say that there are several issues. One, colonialism. Another one, neo-colonialism, as Dr. Kwame Nkrumah discussed. The point where we are right now is neo-colonialism, where even though the Eurasians have gone, and I'm saying Europe and Asia because Europe isn't a continent, it's just tagged on to Asia, that, when you look at it, a lot of the things that we are taught, we aren't taught about the things that we have that are valued. That the documentary I pointed you to, it starts off in Africa and it shows the sustainable architecture, and then they go to Yemen and they show how in Yemen they have skyscrapers made out of the same type of technology. Then they go to England, they call it cob architecture. Then they go to the United States. The oldest standing building there is one of these mud brick buildings. They go all over the entire world. Then they end up in Asia, and then they show how it's used there. So the things that we have been taught, are not valuable all over the world. This is what everyone is doing now. They're doing that combined with solar, combined with rainwater harvesting. Every year we know where the floods are going to be. So imagine if all of this water, you can see it flowing off campus and you know where it's going to end up. Imagine if all of our rules, we were harvesting that rainwater. It would really change things. But again, it comes back to, the point of what is our thinking about things. Oftentimes we think we're imitating Europeans without really knowing very well what they're doing, because if you go to places like Washington, Seattle, Washington, they have these entire parks that are, done with cob architecture. You go to Canada, this is what the whole world is doing. So the things that we were taught to throw away, they are grabbing it. And then finally, just in general, and I think this comes back to your point of colonialism, we're in about, let's say, something like a 500-year box, which is that we aren't taught about anything from ancient times. So if you go back to the Nile Valley, you'll see all of these types of things building with stone, and we have these hills right here are made out of solid stone, and even the rocks are falling onto the road. Now, instead of saying, what can we use those stones for, and looking at the African world and say, well, in Zimbabwe, they had Great Zimbabwe.
Right.
They built this entire thing out of stone.
It's still standing.
Still standing.
Right.
You can look at, these castles in Gondor, Ethiopia. Right. You can go to the Nile Valley, see all these stones. Right. But because we are taught to think that Europeans did everything, we're going to try to imitate what they were doing perhaps 50 or 60 years ago, that they are now trying to come and get what we were doing. So the more we know, and if we can start looking laterally, sometimes we mention let's go forward. Yeah. We have something like a backwards forward paradigm, where backwards is let me go back to my village, and forwards is let's go to the UK or US. Instead of doing that, we can look laterally and say, what were they doing in Zimbabwe with the stones? Let's learn. What were they doing in Senegal, in Ethiopia, in Kemet, Sudan? And then once we know that, then we can start doing things that are appropriate for our context. I'll close there.
Bob Marley said it all: emancipate ourselves from mental slavery.
Quoting Marcus Garvey.
Yes. Okay. Yes, I like that.
No problem.
Great. Yes.
Alaji.
Yes.
You see that colonialism. We had independence so many years ago.
Right.
What is preventing us from thinking out of the box? It's because we have decided to remain in the past. You see, we have universities that have research outfits, and it is supposed to look at the needs of the society and research into it and come out with solutions. The use of the environmental, like the stones that we're talking about, how can we use it to help us? How can we use mud houses to the cement? Listen, that is.
I can assure you, this research is done. Achampon did not just get up and put this, but the linkage between the tertiary institutions, research organizations, and government.
What is preventing that? That is something that we have to find out.
Well, one of my colleagues at African Studies actually did a presentation on these mud brick buildings, Dr. Apiane Ado, and you can actually go and check it out.
Right.
But there are, and I'll let you.
So how do we package it to make it more meaningful to the ordinary Ghanaian? I think that is where we have to migrate to.
It ends up there. Let me give you an example. Of course, I did my PhD in South Africa. As a PhD candidate, your thesis, when you write your proposal and everything, it goes to their National Council, the type of a National Council for Tertiary Education. And so the government sponsorship in terms of what you as a candidate is given and what your supervisor takes has all been worked out. Now, after you finish, your thesis goes back to them. Your details as a PhD candidate is with them. You'll be somewhere, you finish, you've gone, and there is a particular study or research that they want to be conducted. You'll be surprised to get an email. You did this particular study at such and such a time. They want to find out where you are now, if you can present a paper. Even your university does not forget about you. It doesn't exist here.
That's precisely the point that I'm making.
It doesn't exist here.
So we can't blame colonialism. All the time we talk about, yes, emancipate your mind from mental slavery, but how do we do it? When we are still steep in the past and thinking that the past successes will help us to move forward. But what has brought us here can never take us to anywhere.
Okay. I know if I've been you talk like so you hold your power. We'll move on to another very important subject. The General Superintendent of the Assemblies of God, Ghana, Reverend Paul Manso, has called for the reintroduction and effective implementation of days of rest, popularly known as holidays, Nanaboni, in Ghana. On such days, farming and fishing activities are not permitted. This allows the land and river bodies to rest in order to restore fertility. He further called for the revisit and reintroduction of other African traditional values to help the citizenry build a better and more resilient community and country. We're virtually going back to the same topic. He made a call at this year's edition of the annual Kuntum Public Lecture organized by the Esikado Traditional Council at Takrady Polytechnic. The lecturer was on the theme, Our Environment, Our Life, African Traditions and the Preservation of Our Ecology. Many communities in the country have particular days or periods during which natives are prohibited from engaging in certain activities. Among the people in the coastal communities, fishermen by tradition do not go fishing on Tuesdays. In many farming communities, specific days are set aside for farmers to rest. And it is an offense and a taboo to be seen going to farm on those days. Among accounts, there are specific days such as Akwesidai, Fufie, Mememda Dapa, and Awokudai, on which days people are specifically prohibited from doing any kind of work. These are traditional holy days referred to as Anabone. Important traditional practices. Reverend Dr. Frimpong also said, in times past, many traditional environmental conservation practices were used in protecting the environment. Citing an example, he said, taboos help to preserve economic trees such as odum and the African mahoganies. Now the herbalists are destroying them. In African traditional culture, these trees are regarded as trees with spirits which should therefore not be felled without some rituals being performed. Consequently, the felling of such trees was preceded by various rituals, including libation pouring, he explained. He called for pragmatic and locally relevant measures, including a paradigm shift in the way Ghanaians pursued livelihood activities, and then the attitudinal change. Underscoring the importance of attitudinal change, it went on. Now, Dr. Bolakde has will help us appreciate, the relevance of these taboos and, of course, other related issues. So, Doc, what do you have to say, or comment do you have on this?
Yeah, I think it's a very relevant topic, especially for the times that we're in. Recently, actually, one of my students alerted me to this. There is a documentary called The Man Who Stopped the Desert, and it's about a man named Yakuba Sawadogo, who's a farmer in Burkina.
Yeah.
So they have all of these issues dealing with climate change and things of this nature. And what he started doing is that he started using feces and putting it into holes, and then planting trees into those holes. Now, it was something that was said to be, this ancient, outdated practice. Why are you doing this? And everyone said he was crazy when he was doing it. But then eventually it started to take root. All of these trees started to, change the microclimate in the area. And lo and behold, now everyone in the world is coming to him. You can see the documentary, online about this great man and a so-called non-literate person, but he's using this information from the past in order to move things forward. All of these things have to do with environmental conservation. And Kenya, you have the example of Wangari Maathai, another one who people don't know about, Charles Mully, who has a Mully family, homes for children. So all of these people who are basically understanding the role of the environment. Now, I'll take you to understanding what African people do. Now, you'll see African people do things, and oftentimes we don't understand the philosophical foundation of it.
Yeah.
So if you look at something like libation, if you look at something like sacrifice, there's a song by Ajakonimo called Aukra Biakube, and it's the father who plants the coconut. And it's a story. He sings it, but it's a story. And in the story, he talks about there was a man who was 98 years old, and he decided to go into the bush in the back of his house in order to plant a coconut tree. Now, a young man saw him doing this and said, "Oh, why are you doing this? You'll be dead soon and you won't be able to partake of it." And he says, "Oh, Manana, my grandchild, I'm doing this for the descendants, for those who are coming back," right? So just the idea of environmental preservation, what he's doing is probably the most prototypical example of a sacrifice, right? So as opposed to him taking this coconut and drinking it himself and getting all the electrolytes and everything for himself, he's thinking, instead of me consuming everything myself, let me leave some for those who are coming behind. And I think it's a very powerful idea. Now, I'll take you to another text by Drago Diop, and the translation of it is Breaths. And in it, it's a poem where he says, "The dead are not dead. You can hear them in the rustling of the trees. You can hear them in the crackling of the embers in the fire. You can hear them in the movement of the waters." And he goes through all of these different examples that the dead are not dead. Now, let's think about this scientifically, if we can. So when we think about principles of physics, one of them is that energy is not created or destroyed. It is only changed, it's only transformed. So this is something that, we take, and this is in a closed system, so this is what physics tells us. So now picture what Drago Diop is saying, that the dead are not dead, that they're in all these different things. So picture, here is a body that you have, buried into the earth. What happens to that body? So they say ashes to ashes, dust to dust. This is transformation is going to occur. Yeah. So there are weeds that are going to grow up on there, berries that are grow. The bird will come and take those berries, defecate the seed somewhere. This will grow. So all you have are things that are transforming. This is an ancient idea, an ancient Kemet. That's the ancient Egypt. For those who may not know, in the Nile Valley, there was this concept of Kepra, and it's the concept of becoming and transformation. So basically, the idea is that things are only transforming. If you look at the creation story, also from the Nile Valley, they talk about Atum as the creator deity, and they said in creating everything, Atum, and this is the sun that we're talking about. They say that the sun spat out, these other deities, spat out human beings, and so forth and so on. Now, I was looking at a documentary series online, a science series, where it was Neil deGrasse Tyson, and he's talking about physics and biology and chemistry and all these things. And, one of the things that he thought was so profound, he kept mentioning it every episode, and he was quoting another scientist who said, we are made up of nothing but star stuff.
Okay.
So if you think about the hydrogen that goes into us, the carbon, at our most basic level, the same atoms that are in us are in everything else. So when we're thinking about these types of things, whether scientifically or as our ancestors put it, all these things are just transformations. So if you're thinking about sacrifice, the sun, the things that ended up becoming planets were the things that the sun didn't take in for itself. So just like the old man who's planting the coconut tree, he could have taken the coconut for himself. The sun could have taken all of these, and we would all be undergoing fusion. But some parts were left out. So we're all made up of quote unquote star stuff, according to this known astrophysicist. So these are the things that we don't think about. There's a deep philosophy behind why we are preserving these things, why we have these taboos, why we're saying let's leave some of this, because we know that the dead are not dead. The ancestors are literally just transforming the water that exists on the planet now, all the hydrogens, the oxygens, those existed from time immemorial. So all they're doing is coming back in another form. So if you know that there's this cycle that keeps going on, you will do specific things in order to preserve those who are coming right back again. But if you think that time is flat, now Europeans used to think the world is flat. They used to think that time is flat. If you go back to West Nefer in ancient Kemet, the diagram of what the world was is a circle, right? If you go throughout to Congo, they have what's called the Kenga. The idea is that time is a circle, and the planet is also a circle. So these are the ideas that if we actually want to understand, if we just say taboo, people say, oh, it's scary. But if we start thinking about this logically, as though our ancestors actually understood logic, and scientifically, as though they actually understood this through experimentation of what happens when we don't do this. We talk about the desiccation of the Sahara Desert, right? So some scientists attribute that to overgrazing of, cattle, all these types of things as one of the, expedient factors. And then you had other global shifts that would have happened otherwise. But to whatever degree humans contributed to it, well, now you have Africans who have learned from that experience so many thousands of years ago and are now saying, you know what, we have to preserve this grove. We have to preserve this stream. And within 100 years of colonialism and neocolonialism, all of these things that we were living with for millions of years we're killing them off. So the elephants that we have been living with, they say the oldest modern human, Homo sapiens sapien, dates back to about 195,000 years ago, Omo 1, Omo 2, in Ethiopia, Omo River Valley. So if we are looking at this type of thing, we were living with all of these animals for all of those thousands and thousands and thousands of years. But now these same Africans, or I don't know if we may call them anti-Africans, they're not acting like Africans, they're going and cutting the horns off of the rhinos. They're going and, cutting the tusks off of the elephants. They're destroying the water. They talk about the lagoon. People who are still living, they say, call it lagoon before you could drink out of it. Now if you drink out of it, you will die within 2 minutes, right? These are people who no longer understand that they are just going to transform and come back. These are people who think that life is a line. I'm just going to take up everything that I can now, and then who cares what goes on, later on. So I think I've given a little bit of background, philosophical foundation and understanding. But in general, I would say it's a good idea if it's explained. I think part of the reason why people don't hold to the taboos anymore is because they don't even understand it. They say, oh, there's a ghost in there. They go in there and say, oh, there's no ghost, who cares?
Right.
If they can get an understanding that this is to preserve things for future generations, I think it may be better.
Right. Ms. Arthur, listening to him and, of course, also thinking aloud, do you think that earlier on we talked about colonialism, and of course he added new colonialism.
Yes.
Do you think that, quote unquote, or maybe I should remove the quotes, religions that came in might have also played a role? Because some of these things we say they are fetish, and so we don't even want to get near them because it's devilish.
Yeah.
But this is a reverend minister. Friend Paul Mazu is a powerful man. Going back, he's not looking at them as fetish. We are now beginning to see the wisdom of it. Isn't it interesting?
Alaji is interested, but I think it's also. We are still living in the past. In the sense that, okay, taboos were just cultural bylaws that preserved the social order at that time. Okay. And they were shrouded in some form of mystics. The rationale for...
social bylaws with some serious, deep philosophy behind it.
Yes. Which were not explained to people at that time.
Right.
So it was associated with some form of, will I say, religion in itself, traditional religion in itself. You don't sing in the night.
Right.
When you are bathing, you don't have to sing and all that. Now, there are days you don't have to go to farms. Right. In themselves are not bad. But the way they made people to understand the issues, people were observing it just out of fear and of reprisals and punishments. But when
some of them were not those days. Some of them were not out of fear because they understand the environment. They know that they are not living in the world alone. No, they are living with others.
Yes, but they wouldn't tell you that. Don't sing in the night because it will disturb somebody.
Yeah, they don't tell you.
They don't tell you.
Yes.
Don't when you are bathing, don't sing because the soap can cause you some damage or something.
Right.
They should have explained, but this was not explained. So the point I'm making was that it was shrouded in some form of mystics.
Okay.
And you could see that now are taboos relevant today? My answer is no. They are relevant, but they can't exist as they used to exist before. Because if you say, what are my reasons? My reason is that population has now increased. Okay. People at that time, the farmland was small. You have very small populations living in communities. So if you tell them not to go to farm on certain days, yes, it's a day of rest. They appreciated it. But what about now that there are a lot of information? Like when I went to the secondary school, when I went to the training college, and I came back, I saw that this singing in the night doesn't. If I manage not to put the soap in my mouth, I can sing, I can do this. I no more respected those taboos. You see, so what I'm saying is that now there is information technology. There are ways that we can institute these laws without necessarily making them taboos. We can look at them, those that are relevant. Like maybe in Accra, you see that people disturb, people with their music, without caring for the next door neighbor. Maybe some amount of law can be passed to prohibit that, to regulate society. But that does not necessarily mean that we go back to the taboos and shrouded them in mysteries that if you do this, this is going to be this, or we are doing this to pacify these gods and all that. That's where, because in my hometown, for instance, they don't go to farm on Wednesday. And that stems from the fact that the god of the town does not want people to go to the farm. And if if I'm a Christian and I'm told not to worship any other God apart from the God of Jesus, I don't see why I should obey that rule.
Okay.
So if you make a rule that is neutral of all maybe religion, and it's telling us not to do something for our own good, then rationally everybody will follow.
Some argue that in certain situations the spirits don't want to fight with us, and so if we insist that this is what we want to do, they move away and leave us in our wahala.
I don't want.
Yes.
Now it's very interesting that we mentioned, shrouding things, because if you actually look at, for example, the story, the Holy Trinity.
Right.
Now, when people think of the Holy Trinity, they may start thinking of Christianity, but they have to go to the original Holy Trinity. That again in the Nile Valley, you can read about these types of things. I actually got a chance to go to Kemet, recently, but I've studied it for much longer. Now, on December 22nd, here we're talking about the winter solstice.
Right.
The sun gets to its lowest point observably in the sky, right? So either if you're in the northern hemisphere, this is what you'll see. Now, when the sun gets to its lowest point, it stays at its lowest point perceptibly for 3 days. So metaphorically, it's like it's dead for 3 days. And then on December 25th, it rises perceptibly 1 degree. And it keeps rising in the sky, And then eventually you have the spring equinox where the day and the night are equal. And then the sun, the hours of the day overtake the hours of the night. Now, this was told in a story about Asar and Aset, and then their child Heru, and the battle that he had against Set, right? But if you look at Asar, that was the father who was dead and resurrected, cut up into 14 parts. They brought the parts together, and the wife, Aset, was able to get all of the parts except for the phallus. I hope everyone understands phallus, the male member, because that one was thrown into the Nile and it was swallowed up by a catfish. So what did she do? She created what was called a tekken, and the Greeks would call it an obelisk. So if you look at the Washington Monument, this is this tall, long structure. So she created an obelisk. They said she transformed herself into a kite. That's a type of bird. And then alighted onto this obelisk. And when she did that, she became pregnant. This is the very first concept of immaculate conception. We're talking about some 4,000, 5,000 years ago. From that, the sun was called Heru. Heru was a metaphor for the sun itself. So if you want to say hour, that's where you get the term hours from. It's from Horus, which is the Greek term. Now, all of this was given to children. Everyone knew it in the form of a story, in the form of allegory, in the form of a metaphor. And everyone can follow the story. They all understand. They visualize it. But if you actually look up at the sky, once you got older, they would initiate you into what was called the Per-Ankh, the house of life, and that's where all these things would be explained to you. That when they're talking about Asar, that was associated with the constellation Orion. You have these 3 stars that are in a row, right? So in other stories that plagiarize from it, they talk about, you follow the star and the 3 kings and all these things, but it's talking about these 3 stars in a row. And when I first learned about this, I didn't believe it, so I actually wanted to go out and see it. But here, you have these 3 stars, and they point directly to what is called Sirius, which is actually a star system. To the naked eye, it looks like one, but that one was associated with Aset. So here you have Osiris, or Asar, and they point directly to his wife, Aset, right? And then on December 25th, guess where the sun Heru rises? Exactly where this line points to in the southeast.
Okay.
So they used to orient, there's a study of what's called archaeoastronomy, because in ancient Kemet they would align all of these temples. So if it's a temple to Aset or Sobdet, which was also a deity that was associated with that star, they would align the temple exactly to that one. If it's a solar temple, like one to Heru or Heru Bet-Det, then they would align it in such a point that on specific day of the year, that the sun goes directly into the carving, the stone carving of where that is. So if you go to Abu Simbel, they call it hierophany in archaeoastronomy. So all of these are stories that are shrouded in mystery, etc. But once you grow up, then you come to understand what all this is. So what I wanted to do, and you can do this, there's an app for Google called Google Sky Maps. I would entreat everyone who is listening to actually use this app, because on December 25th, look at where Orion, it's the easiest thing to see in the sky, these three that are in a row. Look that they point exactly to Sopdet, that's what they call Sirius, and those point to exactly where the sun rises. So this is what they call the precession of the equinoxes. Every 2,600 years or so, the sun keeps rising with this constellation in the back. So when you talk about 12 disciples, what you're talking about are these 12 constellations. All these are just metaphors to help you understand the creation, all of these things that are created. Because if you actually understand what it's talking about, you will understand everything about the sun, the stars, the movements of the moon, and these things. So they're shrouded in mystery. But the point I was coming to is once you grow up, you understand what all of these are just symbols for. It's just a story to help you understand what you yourself can witness every single year on December 25th. Now, imagine people who don't get initiated. You understand?
Right.
Imagine people who are taken away and given to missionaries, Catholics who are abusing them or whatever they are doing to these children. They're now perpetual children, so they get the exact same story that was plagiarized from the original source in the Nile Valley, but no one ever explains to them, this is just a story. You can look up at the star and see exactly what the story is supposed to be telling you about. You understand?
Yeah.
So I think this is the major thing. So we say that we're living in the past. I'm not sure, but I'll give you, there's a psychologist named Amos Wilson. He's talking about the diaspora, but I think it's relevant here because when we think about all the things that make us up, you know, in terms of who we are, what language are we speaking to each other in and why?
Right.
This is English.
Right.
What happened to cause us to decide, all us Africans here, to decide to speak to English? It's not a decision that we're making.
Right.
There are things, what clothes are we wearing?
Right.
And why are we wearing them? What foods do we eat?
Right.
And why do we? When Pizza Hut opened up in the Accra Mall, I didn't go, but one of my students who's at YFM said that the line stretched all the way outside.
Right.
So I remember when Papaya was open, that was the big thing.
Right.
You know, back in the 90s, everyone wanted to go. Now you have people who are getting into a health food movement. Right, so they had ACOF, other things that are talking about this, because all those people who are eating all of those fast foods at that time, they're now starting to have, you know, high blood pressure, they're starting to have diabetes, they're starting to reap the rewards of all of these things. This idea of do unto others, you can find that in the oldest book in the history of all human beings called The Instructions of Ptahhotep. Right?
Okay.
So I think I've gone into a lot of different things, but I hope all of these things, when we talk about things shrouded in mystery and things of that, I don't want to take away from anything my panelists, because I think they are good points ultimately. But at the same time, I think we also need to put these things in context, because we do a lot of things that we don't understand and we just pray and do things, but no one ever actually explains it to us. But in a traditional African society, you would have gotten to an age where they say, oh, remember that story you've been saying? Remember those songs you've been singing since childhood? This is what they mean. But if someone comes in and cuts off that transmission of knowledge, now everyone is basically a virtual child. They're perpetually in childhood because they never understand the things that elders are supposed to understand.
Right. Well, and that is human evolution, isn't it?
Precisely.
It starts from somewhere. So mysticism is part of the process. And so you cannot just decide that, well, this doesn't exist. For anybody who has grown up in the village, you have some touch with nature. If you are in towns or cities, there is a huge gap between you and nature. And so there are certain things when it's mentioned. Let's take, for instance, death.
Yeah.
I was surprised to go on the net and then see scientists now being able to tell, using technology, when the soul is leaving the body and is captured by camera, powerful camera, and it is explained. And if that energy stays around and how it hovers, I was so shocked. Because these are stories that I have heard, but in the traditional setting. That is why there is for instance, up north there we have in some religions we have electoral accounts. There is 3 days. There is 3 days observation of the funeral. There is the 7th day, and then the 4th day. In our part of the world, you are told exactly what happens on the 7th day, and what happens on the 4th day, and then the final, which is the 40th day. It's not just observing of day, it is a relationship. You know, so if you are told, oh, the day it is the person is gone, but it's gone, it's not gone because you still have some days that traditionally they believe that the soul, whatever it is, comes back. But you take it as mystery, superstition. And now I'm beginning to see signs visiting, haunted houses and using gadgets to even talk to them. It's on the net. They communicate with them.
How are you sure, Alaji, that they are?
No, there's a whole write-up. There are all sorts of.
The mere fact that they are.
Yes.
How do you empirically verify what you say?
Oh no! When they do it, for instance, I have watched about 5 of them. They have that equipment, and the equipments vary. And then they'll say, fine, if indeed you are in this vicinity, let us know by touching an object in that particular house. And I'm telling you, within a second, that object falls. And then you see a situation where you see a signal of an energy moving, and then they say, fine, if it is you, please stop. And then you can see that energy stationary. But it could be a lie, it could be whatever. But these are technological gadgets. I mean,
they are innovations.
Fine.
Because now you can
gradually, science is getting into certain realms that it used not to. You see, we may deny it today, but science is far ahead. And they keep on researching into this. For instance, we said, some time ago, if you said the earth was round, it was heresy. What happened to Copernicus?
Was killed.
He was killed by the church. But he was proved right. Gradually now, that is what we are talking about. They talk about the earth shrinking. Science has now proven that it is being enlarged. And they've proven it. We could not go to Mars. Today, don't we have a craft already that is there?
But it
has taken close to, I've forgotten the number of years that craft has been in motion till it got there. I think about 6+ months or so to cover it, but it is there. The red planet. So we are still exploring. So we should rather continue to have the mind of inquiry.
No, I agree with you.
And not to stagnate because my religion tells me this. And I stop there. I have stopped reasoning. Because my religion tells me, I stopped reasoning. No, I think
that's why they brought the religion to you in the first place, so that you would say that.
And that is what is killing us. Whereas we have stopped reasoning, they haven't stopped.
Mm-hmm. That is the see why you see we always take certain religion as white man's religion. Okay, like you're saying, if that is white man's religion, why are they making progress? Why we are stagnating? Then it is not the religion.
Because the way they taught us the religion and decided to tell us that what we are doing is fetish.
Alhaji, let me ask you this.
And we've decided to stay in that. It is fetish, and we will condemn it without even thinking twice.
Permit me to ask you this. We hold the view, or it has been scientifically proven, that civilization started from Egypt.
Yes.
Africa.
Yes.
At what point?
And even now that the Israelites are black.
If you look at ancient Egypt, they actually said that they came from further into the south.
At what point did Africa lose it for the white to take over?
Oh, seriously, if you read the history, look, this was worked out gradually. Let's take all the wars. When they take, for instance, Spain. Talk about Cordova. How did Europe become Europe? Did they just start just like that? I mean, the
Moors in Spain, Cordova,
even before then, there was Socrates and the rest of them in Greece, and then the arrival of the Islamic conquerors, and then the Mughals.
Yes.
I mean, everything that they did was translated by the Arabs. So French literature actually developed in Cordova. French
Kambon, the numerical
mathematics was translated into Arabic.
When did we lose it?
Algebra. When after they have learned, and that is how nations transform. You have a civilization. Today, America is on top. America is not going to be on top till their kingdom come. America as an empire, all empire have had their tenure. From Babylon to whatever. America's time will be over.
So my problem is...
And then there will be another generation, another empire, and then as they come, they try to wipe out. Now Spain is going back to their old good those days of Cordova. They are going back. If you go to Malta and you see what the sort of poetry, how poetry developed there, and how people had to move from France to go and learn from the feet of Arabs and get back and also put it in their language. English has borrowed so many words.
I agree. Why? Because they are thinking forward. They are thinking forward to expand.
Yes.
We are stagnating.
They told us to stop there.
Who told you?
No, if I may, you see, I think that this argument of colonialism, yes, it's a double-edged sword. It was good, it was bad. But you see, after colonialism, what did we do with what we had? You see, because we all, I always like to look at the example of the Japanese. I don't know, maybe because I had the experience of being there. But you see, fine, they still managed to advance technologically, economically, and what have you. But they still maintain the traditional Japanese culture.
And
you
their
see,
language.
Shinto. They still do
the Shinto traditional religion.
The president will go there.
And my point is, as much as we blame colonialists and what have you and what they did to us, fine, the time has come and gone. 1957 is a long time ago. After 1957, what did we do to suit our context?
Let's break away from the past.
Precisely, because we really cannot keep on going the way of the West. Exactly. Just look at the case of the Chinese. They have realized that, we have fought and struggled and we have tried to pull ourselves away from the domination of foreigners. Now, let's do things to suit our context. Okay? Now, this issue of doing things to suit our context is very important because, I don't know, for our case, we seem to virtually invite everything on ourselves and we swallow everything hook, line, and sinker, whether it is economically, politically, or what have you. But as much as possible, let us look at every point in time what suits us so that we use it to help our context instead of bringing down everything just like that.
Swallowing everything.
That's the point precisely I'm making.
If I can come in, there's a book called The Destruction of Black Civilization by Chancellor Williams, where he actually goes into systematically what happened. So the Greeks first came to Africa to learn. and then those ended up being the ones who caused the end of African civilization in the Nile Valley.
And took us as slaves.
Right. So now let's come to Plato. Everyone has heard of Plato, I think.
Yeah.
So this is Plato from the Laws. Anyone can read this online, and if you read Greek, you can actually read the original Greek. But he says, one ought to declare then that the freeborn children should learn, and he's talking about Greeks, should learn as much of these subjects as the innumerable crowd of children in Egypt learn along with their letters. And he says, my dear Clinias, when I was told quite lately of our condition, talking about Greeks, in regard to this matter, I was utterly astounded myself. It seemed to me to be the condition of guzzling swine rather than of human beings, and I was ashamed not only of myself but of all the Greek world. So we hear about Plato, but I don't know how many of us have ever heard of Ptahhotep or have read anything by Ptahhotep. What just transpired in the studio is an example of what happened to us. So everyone knows Copernicus. Does everyone here know Copernicus? Yes?
Yeah.
Everyone knows Copernicus.
Right.
How many of us know Weresh Nefer? This is the example of what happened to us. So if you look at the sarcophagus of Weresh Nefer, you can see this carved into stone, and I actually pulled it up right here so you can see it. This is an image of the entire cosmos. If you do a Google search right now on your phone or whatever, it says sarcophagus of Weresh Nefer, and it shows their understanding of the world as being circular. So at the time that Europeans are saying that the world is flat, and they're pretending like everyone in the world thought that the world was flat, here you have 350 BCE, an African sarcophagus showing that the world is round. We've never heard of Weresh Nefer, but all of us have heard of Copernicus. This is what happened to us. This is the example of what happened to us. So Copernicus is over 1,800 years after this, and this wasn't the first one. If you go to Dendera, you have an idea that as above, so below. So they also showed the cosmos as this same circle. But when did we learn this in Kresh? Did we learn about Weresh Nefer in Kresh?
No way.
Did we learn about this in primary? Did we learn it in JHS?
We don't even have an
university
organized crash.
Even if I want to say in the university, let's teach Medu Necha so we can just read what this is. You understand? We can see the picture and say, oh, it's pretty, it's a circle. But what, can we read this? How many of us on campus can read this? If we want an example of what happened to us, this is an example that shows we know everything about Eurasians. But if I can list off 100 Africans, and I don't know if we will know more than one. You understand? If I say Amenemok, we won't know. If I say Ames, of the noted mathematical papyrus, if I start talking about the Limbombo bone, which was the first mathematical instrument in the entire planet Earth, 37,000 years ago, that showed prime numbers, multiplication, division, all these things. We don't know a single thing about these, but we can start talking about Copernicus at length. Even when we talk about Plato, we don't talk about, well, what did Plato say about Greek in relation to where they came to study? So we don't know anything about ourselves. So this is what happened at the time where we knew.
Why don't we know anything about ourselves when we were doing the good things? Mm-hmm. Why couldn't we have known that there are competitors? Mm-hmm. There are people. We are not the only people in the world. Mm-hmm. There are people who want to overtake us, and also
the question is, why don't we know that now? Because we learned that before. But if your history doesn't stretch beyond 400 years, you can't see patterns. So at that point in time, let's say at the fall of Kemet, you're talking about 323 BC, so around that point in time. So at the time that we were teaching the Greeks, we may not have known that, okay, these Eurasians are coming in order to kill us. We're teaching them, we don't know. So the first time, there's a proverb in Twi that says, so it's saying the ahoma, the rope that you put around. So the first time you can forgive them, okay, you didn't know that this was going to happen. Maybe you're not magical. But after the second time, you say, okay, well, maybe we'll say, excuse me, you are not the wisest person. So at that point in time, we know that these people who we came to teach and we welcomed in, they ended up coming back as conquerors. We didn't know that the first time, okay? But what about right now in Ghana?
Right now.
This is this is what I'm talking about.
Right.
If you don't know any history, if you know Copernicus and you don't know Weresh Nefer, how can you discern patterns? Right. And this is where we are now. Okay. And this is why we think everything African, the very little bit that we know, which is minuscule, we can't see any value in it because we don't understand anything about what it is to be African. If I start talking about Kagimni, how many of us know who Kagimni is? Right. You understand? Yeah. If I start talking about Nefertiti, how many of us know who Nefertiti is? Yeah. So the information is there. We can go online right now and read the inscriptions of Nefertiti. Yeah. We can read the inscriptions of Winnie in translation in English. So I'm not even saying learn Medu Neter at this point in time, but we can read all these. Right. Miriam Lifetime has a 3-volume series, Ancient Egyptian literature. No. We could learn about it, but we're taught go to Europe and stop.
Right. And interestingly, I think that is a very good point at which we can leave this particular subject. That is, what do we do now after this realization? We can be Muslims, we can be Christians, we can be Hindus, but let's not forget that we have roots. And let's not throw our roots away. Let's go back and begin to pick what we have left. Sankofa. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. Let's go back and pick it. I think
it's trying to say it's not wholesaling, but aspects that will be relevant and can catapult
us. Exactly. I would not even use the word wholesale, because let's allow our mind to wander. Let's not just conclude at this early stage, whilst you haven't even investigated. Let's investigate and let's take time before we come to these conclusions. If not, we'll end up just destroying everything, which is not the best.
But let's look at the relevance to tomorrow's development.
Precisely.
That is the most important thing.
Precisely. Right.
Because you see, history gives us only understanding of the past.
Okay.
It cannot move us forward.
For instance, if there are indeed witches and wizards, we want to go to space.
Put in your order now.
Put in your order now. Well, listeners, very interesting discussion here today. We thank my panelists for that wonderful work. We have a particular subject that has actually been... maybe I'll just go in for a very short musical break, and then I'll come back because Dr. Wodele talked about Konimo's Akradia Kubi. I just want to...
Mitro kakamio, minro kakamio, kakamiampo kwa mwasi anansio. Adam sesre kusi anansimu nonfe, nansimu nonfe, nansimu nonfe, nansimu nonfe anansio. Okuya ae, anansimu nonfe anansio. Mitro kakamio, minro kakamio. Kakamiampo kwa mwasi anansio. Odom sesre kusi anansimu nonfe, nansimu nonfe, anansimu nonfe, anansimu nonfe anansio. Okuya ae, anansimu nonfe anansio. Yo, yede ade ento unye bewe asemenana wafra na ode ya gentirima ni ma gidiri yo said mama fueni yo said mama fueni yo said mama I'm now for no Brandy, and I'm so I'm a mind. When you're many a year, paying another. You said you mama funny, you said you mama funny, you said you mama. You said you mama funny, you said you mama funny, you said you mama. Obviously, you'll be a narrow. Love funny, you said you mama. Obviously, you'll be a narrow. Love funny, you said you mama. Obviously, you'll be a narrow. Love funny, you said you mama.
Well, an interesting discourse between the old man and the young boy. And of course, a message there for the youth. Let's try and work hard, for the betterment of the nation. On this note, I'll go back to Dr. Obadele, to give us a poem to this effect, and then we would continue. Yes, Doc.
Right, so the original title of the poem was Sufrs, or Breaths. I'll read the translation so that I can do it justice. So this is called, they translate it into English as spirits. Okay? Again, spirit, you hear it in respiration, all these things. So it says, listen to things more often than beings. Hear the voice of fire. Hear the voice of water. Listen in the wind to the sighs of the bush. This is the ancestors breathing. Those who are dead are not ever gone. They are in the darkness that grows lighter, and in the darkness that grows darker. The dead are not down in the earth. They are in the trembling of the trees, in the groaning of the woods, and the water that runs, and the water that sleeps. They are in the hut. They are in the crowd. The dead are not dead. Listen to things more often than beings. Hear the voice of fire. Hear the voice of water. Listen in the wind to the bush that is sighing. This is the breathing of ancestors who have not gone away, who are not under earth, who are not really dead. Those who are dead are not ever gone. They are in the woman's breast, in the wailing of a child, and the burning of a log, in the moaning rock, in the weeping grasses, in the forest and the home. The dead are not dead. Listen more often to things than to beings. Hear the voice of fire. Hear the voice of water. Listen in the wind to the bush that is sobbing. This is the ancestors breathing. Each day they renew ancient bonds that hold fast, binding our lots to their law, to the will of the spirit stronger than we, to the spell of our dead who are not really dead, whose covenant binds us to life, whose authority binds to their will, the will of the spirits that stir in the bed of the river, on the banks of the river, the breathing of spirits who moan in the rocks and weep in the grasses. Spirits inhabit the darkness that lightens, the darkness that darkens, the quivering tree, the murmuring wood, the water that runs and the water that sleeps. Spirits much stronger than we, the breathing of the dead who are not really dead, of the dead who are not really gone, of the dead now no more in the earth. Listen to things
more often than beings. Hear the voice of fire. Hear the voice of water. Listen in the wind to the bush that is sobbing. This is the ancestors breathing. Brago Job.
Well, anytime you hear Job, you know you are talking of Senegal, the Wolof. We thank you very much, Doc, for this wonderful poem. So the dead are not really dead. They breathe around us. Thank you once again. And I'll just add, please, since they are still living, let's go clear the graveyards. They are so bushy. That is no respect for the dead. Abusokan is virtually a forest. And almost all the graveyards, with the exception of the military cemetery, that you can say, oh, here we take care of it. The rest is an eyesore. And I was sad when I saw the grave of the Crossroads. This crossroad shooting was named Sergeant Ajete. The graveyard, that grave was actually in a refuse dump. Meanwhile, every year, authorities go to salute the flag at the Black Star Square. They've never asked themselves, where is his grave and the grave of the others? Until a journalist went there, sat on the grave, and spoke with emotion. That is not a good sign of the Ghanaian. Well, I'll leave it at that. 2 cops attack bullion van with civilian accomplice driver killed. The 2 policemen and a civilian who were arrested on Tuesday for allegedly killing a